Hello! Take a look at these comments for one of the world's strictest parents episodes. Most inspiring episode I've ever seen. This is how parents should be. Strict for the right reasons, not overprotective and over strict, or strict for the wrong reasons. The parents were so amazing. Perfect amount of kindness and discipline. Absolute legends. Now, these are proper parents, fun, caring, and strict for a kid's best interest. Kudos to them. All of the parents are straight up awesome, and the kids learned so much. The Florida parents are incredibly wonderful. Well done. Well, it must be a wholesome episode about bad teens going to a different environment and changing, right? It shouldn't contain any mistreatment of teens or disrespect towards them, right? That's the show about the world's strictest parents, not the world's best parents. So, what am I talking about? Let's review it. Now, the premise of the show is fairly simple. A couple of bad, undisciplined kids are forced to move to a different family for a week. That family disciplines them, talks to them, and makes them realize their mistakes, which leads to the kids' character growth, and by the end of the episode, they come home, hug their parents, and say what they've changed, and everyone is happy. Now, I don't think it would work in real life because an environment change may cause a change in behavior, yet that change in behavior isn't gonna last. Everything will come back to normal once kids are back home, because the way you behave mostly depends on the habit, and a week just isn't enough to form a habit. Especially since it's the show about strict parents, they usually discipline children with fear and not with actual respect. So once the source of the fear is gone, children are back to their baseline. In general, I don't believe in such rapid change because change and character development is actually a very long process. However, this is reality TV we are talking about, so we just have to accept it for what it is. Now, as a disclaimer, I don't know how much of this TV show is actually real and how much the children and the parents are just playing. So, whatever I say about them, I say about their characters in the show, not about their actual people. Let's go. The show begins pretty normally. A couple of teens from Australia move to the United States to a family of an ex-US military officer and a PE teacher. The family seems pretty wholesome. They have a whole beach to themselves. They provide children with a lot of summertime entertainment. And they're actually willing to talk to them and communicate their needs and establish rules which are not going to be too oppressive. However, some cracks are starting to show right there. For example, the speaker calls the children of this American family troops, implying that they are obedient like soldiers. Now, it might just be me, but I hate all the comparisons to the military. Military and everything related to war is just so ultimately scary, and the conditions soldiers live in are so cruel that I don't think any people should be made to go through this unless they actually want to do it. So it rubs me the wrong way when children are called troops, as it makes me associate them with soldiers, and it's quite scary. However, that might just be an overstatement on the side of speaker and my personal dislike towards military. However, later the American dad says this.
You would do better to walk through a cage of hungry lions with nothing but pork chop underwear on than to be around me with a bad attitude.
Now, the way he says it doesn't necessarily imply physical violence, yet it certainly doesn't imply open communication and respect. And the American mom also says this.
When kids say, you cannot make me do that, then I always respond, no, I can't make you do that, but I can make you wish you did.
Which honestly sounds pretty threatening, especially given how Dad reacts to her saying. However, it might also be interpreted in a wholesome way, as in she will make kids realize their mistake and understand why they didn't do something. And as we find out later, she is actually pretty wholesome throughout the show. She attempts to establish communication. She doesn't scream and doesn't mistreat the children. As a small spoiler, these are not the parents who are the villains of this show. At least, it's not completely the parents' fault. Parents also say that they are going to allow two teens to smoke outside of the house, but not because we understand that it's hard to quit smoking cold turkey, or because we just don't want to impose too many rules. It's because we actually want to have a tool to manipulate teens with, so that when teens are on their bad behavior, we can completely take away their cigarettes. Thus, we allow teens to do something to use it later as a manipulation technique, which is, well, pretty manipulative. And disrespectful if you ask me, because when you manipulate someone, you show that you don't respect them, you don't treat them as equals. Instead, you're using different tricks to basically deceive them. And those parents do require respect. And I gotta give credit to them. For the most of the show, they are pretty respectful, yet not all of the times. And the times when they're not are pretty concerning. Now, in the first part of the show, everything is going pretty good. Gab is just having the time of his life there, while Eva keeps arguing with American dad and American mom. And during one of those arguments, the American dad even manages to achieve a compromise with Eva and convince her to do a challenge which she didn't want to do. Which is a way to go, that's great. However, in the second part of the show, this happens.
What? Yes, keep saying it. Watch my mouth up.
It happened because after a small party, both Gab and Eva broke the rule about not smoking in front of the other kids, and when Eva sneaked out of the house to go on a date with a guy from the party. Now, it is pretty dangerous to sneak out in a foreign country, especially in Florida, because you don't know the wildlife there, and the dad even mentions that there could be alligators in there. So his concern for Eva is completely justified, and Eva isn't behaving very nice to him. However, sprinkling her with water is obviously way too excessive. It's basically a way to use physical force on a person without actually reversing the physical violence. Now, I don't think we would allow actual physical violence on TV, yet doing something like that is actually very close to it. The only difference is that he isn't actually touching her, yet he makes the water touch her. And it looks pretty disturbing, especially when Eva looks like she's struggling to breathe. Now, it is obviously also disrespectful and quite humiliating towards her. Moreover, cold water can actually be physically painful. For example, it is physically painful to me. It probably won't have any lasting consequences, as we are in Florida and it's pretty hot in Florida. Yet, it is very disturbing in the moment, and it's going to make Eva afraid. It's not going to make her more respectful, more honest, or more open to communication. Rather, it's going to make her do the exact opposite, close up, and just show the parents something they want to see. Now, after this terrible sprinkle scene, the next morning the trouble is still not over for the teens, because the American parents decided to invite the counselor. Sounds good, right? Only it's not a psychologist. It's a counselor from a labor camp for bad teens, and a self-proclaimed face of America, as he says this.
And you'll never forget America.
Americans, are you alright there? Do you need help? Probably yes. Now, an actual psychologist would probably be way more useful in this situation, as he would be able to actually get to the root of the problem and figure out why Eva and Gab felt the need to violate the rules and why we were so disrespectful towards the parents, while the psychologist could also underline the parents treated Eva badly too. However, this counselor immediately gets on Eva's bad side by telling her that she is the problem, she is a bad girl, and she has to change, and then starts screaming at her for no reason, which is obviously extremely respectful of someone who actually wants respect from others. Also makes Eva choose between staying at the American parents' house and obeying all of their rules, or going to a labor camp, which is obviously not a choice at all because she doesn't have an alternative. He eventually even goes as far as to tell Eva that he might ask her parents back in Australia to let her stay in the United States longer so that she can spend more time in the labor camp. Which sounds like a human rights violation to me, given that she's 16, but I guess our self-proclaimed face of America doesn't really care. Now, Eva is obviously scared, so she agrees to obey to all the rules, and so does Gab. On the side note, the American dad tells Gab that he wouldn't go to war with him, which is a good thing if you ask me. No one should be prepared for war. Not a single teenager should be expected to be responsible and brave enough to be at war, because war isn't something humans should be going through. And I hope neither Gab nor any other teenager never ends up being in a war or needing the skills to survive during the warfare. Anyways, both teens get very scared and obedient. And the American mom says this,
that sometimes you may need help on something like that.
which couldn't be farther from the truth. What she did wasn't help. Those schools can't help. What we do is we instill fear in children instead of love, making them obedient but not making them actually realize their mistakes. Children don't understand why exactly what we did was wrong. We just understand that if we do this again, we're gonna get punished even more. So we behave in such a way as to avoid punishment, but we never feel internally satisfied with it. And that's what leads to further rebellions and addictions later. Teenagers are still children, and we still should be treated with love instead of fear. We shouldn't be trained and disciplined like dogs who have to obey to every command. Instead, it's about the time we be treated as equals. Now, when you treat someone as equal, you might still have bad feelings toward them or tell them that something they're doing is wrong, or even refuse to provide them some privileges if they're behaving badly. Yet, there is always some basic respect towards them. There is no attempt to manipulate them or to try to have your way with them for your selfish reasons or to satisfy your wish for control. Now, America has a big problem with troubled teen industry, where teens basically have no rights, so those labor camps or schools for bad teens can exploit teens however they want to. They might make them overwork, not provide adequate education, and basically organize a miniature version of 1984 inside the territory of a camp. They can control their communications with parents, control what they eat, wear, and do, as well as mistreat children physically, verbally, mentally, and provide them inadequate food and the amount of sleep. There is a good webcomic about it called Joe This Is the Elon School, which is written from a point of view of a guy who gets into the Elon school, and it details all the various ways of mistreatment which occurred at that school and how terrible it is. For example, to deliver kids to the Elon school, the Elon school staff would sign a contract with their parents and actually kidnap children right from their beds. Then they would continue to prevent children from communicating with their parents without someone from Elon school constantly watching and making sure the child doesn't report the abuse. Since children were younger than 18 years old, there was pretty much nothing they could do about it, as the law pretty much treated them as a property of their parents. And as long as their parents were brainwashed by Elon staff who kept telling them that the only hope for their child is to stay in the school and for the parents to keep paying, the parents kept doing it, and the children just couldn't escape. Joe from a comic book actually escapes, yet the police brings him back, as that's where he is legally required to be, even if his place mistreats him. Now, Elon School is a very extreme example, and I can't say how bad Camp Consequence is. What I can say is that their representative screams at children and threatens them to pretty much take them away from their parents and not let them come back to their homeland. And it's so disturbing that the American mom presents the counselor as the solution to a problem. Just scare your kids, remind them that we basically have no rights, and they can be sent to a labor camp if you so desire. Troubled teen industry is so terrified and dehumanizing, but I just don't think it should be taken that lightly. And it certainly shouldn't be used to terrify children, as it's an actual threat to their physical and mental health, and sometimes even their lives. Now, after the teens are scared into obedience, they read the letters from home, where their parents tell them how hurt they are, but how we still love them. Teens have emotional moments, they have a breakdown, and they realize how we were wrong towards their parents and how we should be better. And this moment is pretty awesome. And letters can be a great tool for communication if you can't say something eye to eye, if you find it too hard to formulate your thoughts and deal with your emotions, well, it might be better to write a letter, especially for Gab's parents who are deaf. Now, a counselor was actually not needed. The children understood their mistakes by actually hearing what their parents have to say. Communication is key. Fear just defies the entire purpose. The next day, children are forced to go through military boot camp challenge, which is just so wrong on so many levels. First of all, physical activity shouldn't be used as a punishment, and people who go through military boot camps should be there voluntarily, as it just puts too much of a physical strain on the body. And it isn't really different from violence, as it also causes physical pain. And it isn't really different from straight up violence, as it also causes immense physical pain and might even cause psychological trauma. The children might remember and associate exercise with something terrible, with a scary man screaming at you and you pushing yourself too hard and feeling like you're about to pass out. This is not a healthy attitude to have for the exercise, and we're not very likely to exercise in the future. Also, it is an extremely toxic way to try to instill discipline in children by forcing them to do a lot of physical activity, which makes them more mentally vulnerable. As they're feeling weak, they're feeling like they're about to pass out, so they're more likely to agree and take to heart everything you say. That's literally just mentally destabilizing them to impose your opinion on them. And that's pretty manipulative and toxic. In general, military officer doesn't treat children with respect, yet he demands respect on them, instilling in them the idea that to be unequal is okay, to be disrespected is okay, as long as you respect others and they're scary enough. You should just obey to someone who is scary and screams at you, because that will keep you out of trouble. Yet, this is not a good pattern for the adult life, where people won't actually scream at you or force you to do strenuous exercise. A way better pattern would be to communicate with children and to talk to them about the pain their parents experience, instead of using the military boot camp as a metaphor of what their parents experience daily. And it's not even a good metaphor. Physical and emotional pain can't really be compared. We are rated on the different scales and we don't have the same impact. Moreover, the power play is also different. When children disrespect their parents, it hurts their feelings because parents love them. But when a military officer disrespects children, it doesn't really hurt their feelings that much, it just scares them a lot. Well, parents aren't usually afraid of their children, so it isn't really a good metaphor for what the parents are feeling. Moreover, it is simply dangerous. Eva says that she has asthma, yet the military officer says,
I got asthma, my wife got asthma too, and I don't care. Get out!
Which is, wow, that's extremely concerning. Why don't you care about your wife and her health conditions? Don't you want her to be happy, healthy, and breathing? In general, though, it is pretty concerning how he disregards Eva's health concern, because he doesn't know how serious her asthma is. Maybe she is actually incapable of doing it. Or maybe she is capable of doing it, but she will feel terrible afterwards, and it isn't gonna teach her a good lesson. She will just remember and associate physical exercise, military, and maybe even America itself with pain. It is pretty disturbing how people underestimate the pain children go through and in general tend to disregard their health concerns. For example, I remember how in my middle school we had to all run a pretty long distance to receive a good PE grade for the term. And one of the girls, she really needed a good grade, so she ended up running the whole distance. And afterwards she was barely able to breathe, and the other girls had to help her walk back to the school building. As she couldn't really walk herself, she was crying, she was breathing very heavily and pretty much struggling to breathe or do anything. And she needed to lie down afterwards to feel better. And everyone just disregarded it. The PE teacher just assumed she was over-dramatizing. He just assumed that because she's young, she can't actually be that exhausted. And everyone treats things like that like normal. Kids just over-dramatize. Nothing bad will happen from exercise. I came home that day and I just laid there staring at a wall for like an hour because I just couldn't process how people could lack empathy so much. And if we're ready to disregard such an obvious health concern as someone struggling to breathe and walk after running for a long time, what else are we ready to disregard? It happened more than 10 years ago, and I still remember this episode. And I wasn't even the victim in this situation, yet it still impacted me a lot and made me a more depressed person to a certain extent. My point is, you should treat health concerns seriously and don't push children too far, as it's only gonna hurt them, if not physically, then mentally. As if they are the victim of that situation, they are certainly going to remember it, and you will forever be a villain in their head. Anyways, afterward, the children are considered to be changed. They get to drive an airplane and then come back home, hug their parents, tell them that they've changed, and everyone is happy. So we get a happy ending, but at what cost? At the cost of manipulations, at the cost of mental and sometimes physical abuse, at the cost of instilling fear in children. And the worst thing is that no one seems to notice this. This episode has a lot of wholesome parts, with some sinister episodes just mixed in, and people don't seem to notice. Or even worse, they seem to treat it as normal. See, after all, it is normal as long as children are loved. They can and should be given some tough love, right? And those people might be right. The American parents might love their actual children and love those Australian children. What they might lack is respect. This understanding that teens are closer to their equals than to their subordinates. Their opinions should be asked and respected. They should be given an actual choice and not an illusion of choice. And they should be given time to decompress if they're openly telling you that they can't process their emotion at this point and they need a timeout. To think of parenting as you would think of training a dog is deeply disturbing because it doesn't give kids the basic respect. And this treatment on the level of a family leads to the same treatment from the laws, who don't protect children's rights enough and basically treat children as a property of their parents. The problem is, love without respect can be twisted. It can stem from the wish to control someone, to own them, to be their everything. And it can lead to a lot of toxic stuff, as we can actually see in this episode with the whole military bootcamp thing and the water splitting thing. The thing what saves you from toxicity is respect, is respecting the human in the other human being, even if it's a child, and talking to that human, instead of just trying to get your way with your subordinate. Now, I can talk forever about the way children's and especially teenagers' rights are not respected enough, and how behind the veil of tough love and strict parenting, an actual abuse can be hiding. And let me know if you want a separate, more serious video about it. What I wanted to say in the end of this video is that love is dangerous without respect, and fear is a terrible substitute for respect. And we can even see this in the end credits, where even though Eva is having a good life, it's mentioned that Gab is still trying to find common ground with his parents, because living in this family didn't actually teach him the strategies to deal with his parents. It only taught him to keep silent and don't complain, because a military bootcamp sergeant can appear out of thin air and scream at him. In general, I think this is the general problem with the show. While it shows a lot of wholesomeness, it also shows a lot of bad behavioral patterns and a lot of parenting techniques which are honestly pretty terrible and disturbing. Anyways, let me know what you think about this show, this episode in the comments. And also just let me know any thoughts you have about children's rights and all the ideas that I mentioned in this video. See you in the next video. Goodbye!